Hello there, Brick Fanatics, and happy March! We have somehow made it a full 2 months into the year of 2025. Depending on where you live, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, you might be thinking to yourself, oh, thank goodness I've made it through the darkest, dingiest, coldest, most depressing months of the year, and now things are going to get a little bit nicer. And if you live on the Southern Hemisphere, you might be thinking the complete opposite. Thank goodness I have made it through the intense heat of summer, now things can cool down a bit and I can be a bit more relaxed. Either way, we are making progress through this year, which does mean that we need to bear in mind some things are not going to last forever. And when I say that, I mean specifically some LEGO sets are going to retire by the end of this year. You may well have seen our video from last month on the full list of every single LEGO set scheduled for retirement by the end of 2025. Now, coming into March, there have been some updates there. The LEGO Group has moved a few retirement dates forward for some LEGO sets. So we're going to do a brief update on that list and give you a few other LEGO sets that you just need to be aware of that are retiring. If you haven't seen that full video previously, do make sure that you check that one out as well. But the main bulk of this video instead is going to be focusing on one specific group of LEGO fans, city builders. Because there are an awful lot of really nice buildings that are retiring by the end of this year that you need to be aware of. First off, we've got a couple of modular buildings that are going to be retiring. Then we've also got the Daily Bugle that is retiring, which is modular adjacent in that it is compatible with the modulars, but it is kind of its own thing at the same time. And then there are a few other really interesting buildings that are going to be retiring, particularly from the LEGO Friends theme. I'm sure by this point that it doesn't need to be said, but I'll say it again anyway, that no matter what your opinion on mini dolls might be, LEGO Friends has some of the best buildings in all of the LEGO catalogue, so it is significant that we are losing some of these buildings. This is probably going to end up being a fairly long video, so let's very quickly run through all of those LEGO sets that are newly scheduled for retirement by the end of this year. The following LEGO sets across various themes are now scheduled for retirement by December 31st, 2025 at the absolute latest. 75387 Boarding the Tantive 4, 76286 Guardians of the Galaxy The Milano, 76310 Iron Man Car and Black Panther vs Red Hulk, 76433 Mandrake, 42181 VTOL Heavy Cargo Spaceship LT-81, 60408 Car Transporter with Sports Cars, 11042 Creative Happy Box. All of these LEGO sets had previously been scheduled to retire later on in 2026 or beyond, and now will be retiring by the end of December 31st at the latest. Just as a reminder, a LEGO set that is retiring is a LEGO set that the LEGO Group is no longer manufacturing after a certain date. It doesn't mean that these ones are all going to disappear on the stroke of midnight. Some of them will disappear from store shelves much earlier. Some of these will disappear from store shelves much later, depending on how much stock is left over after the LEGO Group stops printing and manufacturing more of them. Like, just as an illustration, and this is partially me just wanting to explain things a bit more clearly, partially just me wanting to show off something that I've got recently. This is my brand new, very nice Casio watch with the little Pac-Man tie-in there. It's very cool. It says Waka Waka up there. But aside from the fact that it's got some Pac-Man stuff to it, it is exactly the same watch that I had as an 8-year-old. Coming up on 30 years ago, and it's impressive that Casio has managed to keep exactly the same watch, more or less. I don't know if things have changed a little bit under the hood, but it is exactly the same design. It is a product that has been on store shelves for decades and decades without much, if any, of a refresh. LEGO does not work the same way. In fact, most products don't work the same way. You get some things that will just stay endlessly on store shelves, but over time the LEGO Group will release new LEGO sets, and in order to make space for those, they will retire old LEGO sets. And so once a LEGO set is kind of done with its lifespan, the LEGO Group will quietly shuffle it off, stop making more of them, and will start making something new instead. That's what we're dealing with here with retiring LEGO sets. They are LEGO sets that have just reached the natural end of their product life cycle, and this happens sooner for some LEGO sets than others, as we will be getting into here. Some things can just stay on the shelf for a very long time, and people will keep buying them periodically, and it's all good. Some things have a relatively short lifespan, will be out for a year or two, and then will just be very quickly replaced with something else. And it really does depend on the product in question, on the LEGO set in question, what the fan base is like for that LEGO set, and how long the LEGO Group can justify keeping it around if they feel like sales are starting to flag. There are some things on the 2025 list that have been scheduled for retirement despite only just having been released, and these dates do tend to shift around. The LEGO Group will, over the course of this year, say, oh no, actually we'll push those dates out a little bit further, or oh, we'll bring these dates in. That's why we've got an update to that list. But it is just interesting to see the LEGO Group having a slightly shorter lifespan in mind for some of these LEGO sets. On the other hand, you've got some of the buildings that are going to be retiring. Now, I've put together a little list of some, not all, but some of the buildings that are retiring this year that I feel are going to be significant, in particular to the city building community. The kinds of LEGO fans that love to have their own little mini land set up, like they can pretend that they're a giant or they're Godzilla and stomp around in their little city. You know what I mean if you have one of these yourself. The kind of thing that maybe not every LEGO fan has the space for, but all of us kind of envy somewhat. And there are all kinds of LEGO buildings that you can put into these cities, because possibly you can put any kind of building in that you want, but the ones that do tend to rule the roost, the ones that normally set the standard for a lot of people's city collections at home, are the modular building collection. These sets have been around for 20 years now. Normally the LEGO group tends to add one per year, and so as a result we normally see just one or two retire every year. And this time around we've just had the wonderful Tudor corner house, which is just, it's such a beautiful piece of work. I really don't, as we covered in our ranking video for these modulars, I don't think that any of these are actually bad in any way. Some of them are maybe a little bit dated in their design, but all of these are gorgeous in their own right. But it does feel like year on year the LEGO group is really upping their game with these and making even more impressive and even more detailed and beautiful LEGO sets. But in order to make space for new modulars, old modulars have to retire, and it does feel like something that's a little bit more painful than most LEGO sets to see go, because you know that there is always somebody new coming to these modular buildings, and they will look at whichever one is on store shelves at the moment and they will say, yes, okay, I'll buy those, and then they'll be like, oh, but look at all of these brilliant ones from the past that I missed out on. And so for that reason, a lot of modular buildings tend to go for quite a large sum on the aftermarket, because it's something that LEGO collectors know will consistently be in demand, even years, even decades after a set has retired. As I have shown off in the past, I have a nasty habit of buying some of these sets and then leaving them in their boxes because I don't really have a space for them at this moment in time. And it's one of those things where, oh, maybe one day in the future I'll be able to line out my full big LEGO city with all of these modular buildings on display, but right at the moment they're just going to sit around in boxes, in cupboards and in the loft. The nice thing is I can pretend that they're an investment, because if I never actually get around to building them, I can just sell them new in box in years to come. But let's be perfectly honest here, I am never going to sell them. I am going to have them in the loft and in cupboards for many, many years. And then maybe one day down the line, I will spend like a week solid building all of them and putting them all on display. Anyway, the two modular buildings that are retiring this year are the 2022 modular and the 2023 modular, respectively. That's the Boutique Hotel and the Jazz Club. And both of these, I think, are just so gorgeous. These both came out after the Bookshop modular building, which I consider to a certain extent to be the watershed moment for the modular buildings in general, in terms of the LEGO group using more bold and vibrant colours for a lot of these buildings. So the Boutique Hotel reminds me very strongly of some of my favourite ice cream flavours, mint choc chip and cookie dough. That's definitely the colour scheme that I see there. And then the Jazz Club has this wonderful deep red, which is complemented by the blue at the bottom and then also the yellow of the small building next door. Absolutely, really just such gorgeous colour choices, which really help these buildings to stand out as part of a display. I'm not fetching it down from the loft right now, but I do have the Boutique Hotel in box, and it is such a pretty one. I really do hope that I get the chance to build it one day. As I understand it, the rooms in this set are quite cramped because, of course, there's the hotel part of it and then also the art gallery part, and both of these segments of the build tend to feel a little bit just narrow because of that wonderful wedge shape, and then also just they're not overflowing with extra space in the way that, say, the museum LEGO set is. I think that's an unfortunate necessity when you've got this kind of wedge-shaped building, and I do think that it does stand out from a bunch of other modulars for being such an evocative, different shape. Plus, let's face it, with a lot of modulars, it's generally more about what's outside than what's inside that counts, because you don't spend an awful lot of time opening up the various floors and looking inside and peering in to see what the minifigures are doing on the inside. Most of the time, it is being appreciated as an outer building. You're looking at it and you're thinking, oh, that's very nice, and not really worrying too much about what is going on inside. That, I think, is something that really counts against the Jazz Club, and it might be part of the reason why I mean, this isn't set in stone, this isn't absolutely certain, but I have heard just anecdotal thoughts from people who have said that they weren't quite as impressed with this one as, say, the Boutique Hotel, because the outside of the building doesn't look quite as interesting. This is a fairly standard outside, and then you go inside and you've got the cool little Jazz Club there. I really love the little stage. I love the bass player in particular, who has a cochlear implant, or at least a hearing aid of some kind, and then has that wonderful double bass element, which is just, it was unique for this set. It debuted with this set. It's shown up in other places since. It's used for Wednesday Addams' cello in the Wednesday set, but it is just such a pretty element, and I'm thrilled that we have that, because it's always great to get more musical instrument representation in LEGO. I love a lot of the signage in this LEGO set. I think that there's some really nice printed elements that have got some really cool graphic design, really just funky, jazzy, slightly different kinds of things that we don't normally see with a bunch of LEGO sets because of that jazz theming here, and it's so cool. Once these two modular buildings retire, the only ones that will be on store shelves will be the LEGO Museum, which is really nice in its own right, and then the brand new Tudor Corner. And so we're losing half of the modular buildings that are currently on store shelves. Of course, we'll probably have, I'm assuming, 2026's model by the time that these ones are retiring, but even so, it is just worth bearing in mind that if you are thinking of dipping your toes into the modular building collection, it's better to do it now rather than waiting and having significantly fewer options. Unless you want to pay aftermarket prices, in which case you're going to be paying an awful lot more. I don't know if this is the typical modular building collection experience, but one thing I do think tends to happen with some people is you'll look at these for a long time before you actually bite the bullet. Now for me, my first one was the bookshop, but the first one that I genuinely considered getting was the Parisian Cafe, and then maybe Assembly Square, which were out a long time before the bookshop. I feel like this is something that for some people tends to be the trend, is you look at these for so long, you think, oh, they're such gorgeous looking buildings, they're really nice, I kind of want one, I kind of want one, I kind of want one, and then year on year as you're thinking about it, eventually you go, all right, that's the one for me. That is the one that I just need in my collection more than any other. And once you've crossed that threshold and you have purchased one of these modular buildings, well, it's lonely if it's there on the shelf. So you need to get a bunch more of them to go alongside it. And I do feel like that is kind of the driving force for a lot of people in picking up more and more modulars, is you see that one that really speaks to you, and then you just need to start collecting. So if you happen to be someone who has looked at Tudor Corner and said, that's the one, I need that, I cannot live without that in my life, then it is worth bearing in mind that if you're going to be purchasing that one, you might want to think about picking up the Boutique Hotel or the Jazz Club as well while they're still available. After all, I think looking at the colour schemes and the architectural styles that are available across all of these modulars, it's my personal opinion that the one of all of these sets that pairs the best with Tudor Corner is probably the Boutique Hotel, because they both feel like they're of a similar-ish kind of era, or at least they're slightly older, more old-fashioned looking buildings, where even something like the museum does feel a little bit less like it's steeped in old world charm. Of course, it's common across all of these modular buildings that they all feel a little bit old world and a little bit old-fashioned, because that's kind of the nostalgic feeling that the LEGO designers are going for with this particular sub-theme. But even so, I do feel like some of them feel a little bit older than others. But maybe you don't want your LEGO city to feel particularly old-fashioned and particularly dated. Maybe you want something that is sparkly and shiny and modern and new, and if so, then you do really need to bear in mind that the Daily Bugle is also retiring this year, because this is probably the best skyscraper that we've had in LEGO form if you just want a building that looks like a skyscraper. As I said in the previous retiring sets video, Avengers Tower is a pretty decent skyscraper, but it's very Avengers Tower, whereas the Daily Bugle, if you take out all of the Spider-Man stuff, you've got a really cool, just a normal skyscraper building. Big, tall, metal, glass, does the job very well, and that's not something that you really see from any other LEGO set on the market right now. I do feel like this is kind of a gap in what the LEGO group is offering up. They've got a bunch of these older buildings, but they don't have many very new things, and where they do bring in more modern buildings, they're never quite at the same scale and the same size as the Daily Bugle, which just towers, literally towers, over anything else that you might have, which is of a similar kind of design. We will be talking about other more modern buildings later on in this video, but just for the moment I want you to appreciate the Daily Bugle, and appreciate that if you are looking to dip your toes into the water with modular buildings in general, or even if you are a seasoned modular building collector and you're looking to add something else to your collection, then the Daily Bugle, if you've not already picked it up, is a brilliant choice. One thing I do think is worth pointing out with the Daily Bugle, as opposed to all of the modular buildings, is that instead of being built floor by floor like a traditional modular building, so you have to open up the entire floor in order to get in and look at what's underneath it, instead with this one you can just take off the back panels where an entire window for an entire floor of the building comes away in one go. And that means that it is a lot easier to display this not just as a building but also as the stuff that's going on inside the building, and that's really neat. It is honestly something that I would kind of like to see in more modular buildings, and I'm aware that by this point the formula is very much set in stone and it's not going to be changed at this point, but it would be brilliant if they're all opened up like the McAllister Home Alone house, where it's more like a doll's house and you can have it on display open up so that people can have a look in the back without having to take apart the entire building to get in there. Essentially, I'm thinking of something more like the Art Factory, the upcoming Bricklink Designer Program Series 6 set, which can either be traditional modular size or it can fold out and you can have it as one big long set instead to be able to get a better look at what is inside. And this might be a really cool thing to have in more modular buildings, but at the same time, I'm aware that the formula is somewhat set in stone at this point, and of course, that does add a bunch more structural challenges for the LEGO designers. Something else that's worth bearing in mind is that we are going to be getting more Spider-Man LEGO over the course of this year, and it is always nice to have a place for Spider-Man and his friends to hang out. The Daily Bugle is a perfect building if you just want to fill it with all of the Spider-Man minifigures that you can possibly get your hands on. Will 2025 be a particularly good year for Spider-Man minifigures? We'll have to wait and see. Anyway, those are the three big noteworthy buildings that are retiring by the end of 2025 that I feel like city builders need to pay particular attention to, as they may or may not go on discount over the course of this year. They are by no means the only sets that you should be paying attention to, because there are a bunch of other LEGO sets which to varying degrees will work very well alongside modular buildings or just as part of a larger collection of buildings in general. Some of these can be dropped alongside a modular building with no changes whatsoever. Some might want a little bit of tweaking, a visit to Rebrickable, etc. And some could just very well be their own thing. For example, retiring by the end of 2025 is 21335 Motorized Lighthouse. It's not necessarily something that you would want on Main Street in your city, but it's something that you would have to one side over by the ocean or the beach that you may or may not have built. It's definitely a piece that can go very well alongside these. It's got that same kind of structure as a modular building in terms of you being able to take the roof off and get a good look inside. And crucially, it's got a similar level of detail, so it feels like a continuation of the kind of design choices that you see in modular buildings. I feel like this is another one that is probably going to be desirable for years to come, and I say that because I remember before we got the LEGO Ideas Lighthouse, myself looking desperately through everything I could find on eBay to try and find a cool looking lighthouse from before that set, because there were lighthouses beforehand. They weren't to the same scale and with the same level of detail or anything, but they were out there, and I was like, oh, I'd quite like a nice lighthouse. So presumably I'm not alone in that, and once this LEGO Ideas one retires, there will be a bunch of people who are similarly scouring all of the various websites trying desperately to find one, because it is a very nice building and it scratches an itch that you don't necessarily always see at this particular scale and price point in LEGO. I wouldn't be surprised if we see more lighthouses in the future from LEGO Friends and LEGO City in particular, but I don't think that they will be quite as pretty as this one. Now, while we are here primarily to talk about the needs of city builders, I do want to talk about a few castle-ish and castle-adjacent sets that are going to be retiring by the end of this year. Because for one thing, I feel like there is a degree of overlap between people who like their cities and people who like to have a nice castle layout, but also because I feel like you could get away with putting some of these in your LEGO city, especially if you happen to live in a country such as the United Kingdom, where it is entirely normal to be in a city and just have a castle in the middle of the city. For example, my bus ride home from school when I was a teenager involved going past Windsor Castle, and it is just there in the middle of the city. On the one side of the street you've got Windsor Castle, where the Queen lived, and on the other side of the street you've got Pizza Hut and McDonald's and a WH Smith's. It's a very odd street. So then, if you happen to be looking for a castle or some older buildings to drop into your LEGO cityscape, here are a few that are retiring by the end of this year. 10305 Lion Knight's Castle, 10332 Medieval Town Square, 21341 Disney Hocus Pocus The Sanderson Sisters Cottage, 75978 Diagon Alley, 43222 Disney Castle. Now, I could have mentioned a bunch of the different little chunks of Hogwarts that will be retiring, but I've specifically only picked Diagon Alley because it is one that I feel like works very well within a cityscape more so than, say, the Owlery. Diagon Alley has been around since 2020, so fair enough, I guess it is time for it to go, and we have got a new Diagon Alley instead, but it does leave behind things like Gringotts, which are just going to be by themselves now in the catalogue without the things that they were designed to connect to. Of course, Gringotts works very well as a display piece all by itself, I just think it's going to be a little bit lonely now. The Diagon Alley buildings are not as detailed as a modular building. They've only got the front facade, and when you turn them around, you've just got the open back there so that you can look inside and they're little doll houses, and that's brilliant in its own right because, as said, I quite like that with a Lego set. But at the same time, they don't provide that wraparound 360 building design that you might see from certain other Lego sets on this list. Nevertheless, they do add something to a homemade Lego city that you're not really going to get from anything else, and in particular, if you're a fan of Lego Harry Potter, yes, but also if you like to have a slightly old-worldy section to your Lego city. Again, in the United Kingdom, we have a bunch of different areas around different cities, which are these very, very old listed buildings that are illegal to be demolished or to be renovated to look more modern. These are buildings which are deliberately kept because they look cool and old-fashioned, even if they are incredibly drafty to actually live in. So yes, on the one hand, in the LEGO catalogue, you don't get a lot of things that are big and shiny and modern like the Daily Bugle. On the other side of the coin, you don't get a lot of things which have more than, say, 200 or 300 years of history to them, buildings that have been around for coming up on 1,000 years and are somehow still standing, of which there are plenty in various countries across Europe and across the rest of the world, but obviously this one is more European in its design. And again, similarly, Medieval Town Square could fit in very well with some people's LEGO cities, depending on the vibe that they're going for. You do occasionally get a thatched roof in the UK still. It's always fun to see. You go, ah, look at that. That's a very old building with a very awkward to maintain roof. Then you've got the Disney Castle, which is retiring. And again, we've gone into this in a previous video. If you've not already seen our video on the Beauty and the Beast castle, do check that out. It's got a nice history lesson in it. Otherwise, it's just worth bearing in mind that this thing is going. And it feels like the Disney Castle has been a staple of the LEGO catalogue for so long now that it's going to be weird to not have this in some form or other. So I definitely think it's not beyond the realms of possible that you might want to put one of these in your LEGO city. The same for Lion Knight's Castle, as mentioned, and just I wanted to mention that anyway so that people are aware. If you're not already aware, we've gone on about it at great length on this channel already, but if you're not already aware, Lion Knight's Castle is retiring. That is the big mainstream castle that is available from the LEGO group right now. Does that mean that we're getting another big castle in the near future? One can only hope, but in the meantime, the Bricklink Designer Program is delivering plenty of very nice castles. Is it the perfect fit for every LEGO city builder? Absolutely not, but is it the perfect fit for a LEGO city builder who really likes Disney and wants to have the entire Disneyland castle just towering over everything else in your city? Yeah, there are definitely some people for whom that absolutely works. Similarly, you've got the very American Sanderson Sisters Cottage, which works very well on the outskirts of a cityscape. That's actually where it exists in the film Hocus Pocus. It's just on the outskirts of the town of Salem, so something that can absolutely work within your lineup if you're wanting something a little bit spooky, but also kind of old-fashioned, several hundred years to it. It's not the newest building in your display, but it's something that can absolutely fit in. And of course, you get a Bette Midler minifigure, and who doesn't want that? Right, 3 more that we're losing. 10325 Alpine Lodge, 10339 Santa's Post Office, 43245 The Magical Madrigal House. 2 of these then are from the Winter Village collection. They add a different architectural style that you might not get across all of the rest of LEGO, although you do tend to see these log cabins turning up more often than not in some kind of LEGO set. If that is your particular preference, then just bear in mind that they are going. The Madrigal House offers something different because you get something which is, yes, very much inspired by a Disney film, but it's a completely different kind of architecture to most LEGO sets. Again, instead of going to kind of the Northern Europe that you would see from the Winter Village collection, instead you've got something that is brightly coloured, yes, but Colombian in origin, and that is something that is definitely underrepresented when you consider that the vast majority of LEGO buildings are in some way European in their architectural style. It's not a big surprise that the LEGO group favours European architecture. After all, it is a Danish company and a lot of the people that work there come from across Europe. Either way, obviously this LEGO set comes primarily from the Disney film, but it is so nice to have a part of the world represented in LEGO form that we otherwise otherwise would probably not see. And it's a wonderful different type of building structure. It would be nice if we could get a more fleshed out Madrigal house, something which feels a little bit more akin to a modular building, something which has that full 360 design to it, and then all of the cool rooms inside. I'm aware that that would be a challenge because of just how big this house is on the inside, because it is a TARDIS. It's literally bigger on the inside. Someone says that in the film, but either way, it's something that I would like to see at a slightly larger scale than we've had it at this point. Now, it is funny looking at this list just how much this video feels like it's turning into a culmination of everything that we have spoken about in a lot of videos recently, because I do want to talk about two very modern houses that are retiring at the end of this year, and if you've seen the video on the Twilight Lego set, you'll already know which ones I'm going to mention. 31153 Modern House, 42639 Andrea's Modern Mansion. So I've brought up both of these in the past as brilliant examples of an architectural style that we don't get very often in Lego form. This very modernist, very clean, very stylish aesthetic, which for the most part the Lego group eschews in favour of something with a little bit of history to it, a little bit slightly older in design. Both of these I feel are an excellent representation of a more modern house, more so than I would say the Twilight house, which does feel a little bit flat by comparison. Both of these retiring at the same time is very interesting, and I'll get into this in a little bit, but it does mean that we are losing the main bulk of one particular architectural style that otherwise is not in Lego form. Of the two of these, I do prefer Andrea's Modern Mansion, and I do hope that we can get something else, probably from Lego Friends, which is similar to this again in future, because it is just such a nice house. It gives me BoJack Horseman vibes, if that is something that makes any sense whatsoever, because it feels like that kind of stylish rich person house, which is not normally the kind of thing that you get in Lego form. And if I were to put a BoJack Horseman minifigure in any Lego set as his house, I would say it would probably be this one. I don't feel like Andrea would love to have her house taken from her by a talking horse, but then BoJack Horseman doesn't like his house being taken away either. Anyway, Andrea's Modern Mansion serves as a nice transition to one of the themes I wanted to talk about in particular, and to a certain degree I feel like I've saved the best for last, because the Friends theme, as I have said in many videos, has some of the best buildings of anything in the Lego catalogue. Like, pound for pound, if I can use a very poor expression there, I feel like the Lego Friends theme delivers more hit buildings than any other theme. No, these are not as detailed or as big or have as high a piece count as a modular building, but there is something in them which is just so unique, especially in terms of their colour scheme, in terms of their design, in terms of the level of detail that they achieve with relatively few pieces. These are brilliant buildings, and if you are a Lego city builder and you've not yet embraced Heart Lake City sets, it might be about time to consider these. Here are just a few of these buildings from the Lego Friends theme that are retiring that I feel like you need to pay particular attention to. 41748 Heart Lake City Community Centre, 42604 Heart Lake City Shopping Mall, 42614 Vintage Fashion Store, 42618 Heart Lake City Cafe, 42621 Heart Lake City Hospital, 42638 Castle Bed and Breakfast. That castle bed and breakfast set, by the way, absolutely proves my point that you can have a castle in a cityscape and it just fits perfectly, because that's exactly what that building is intended to be. But anyway, the one that I really wanted to draw your attention to here is the Heart Lake City Community Centre, which is, first off, gorgeous in its own right. It's got that wonderful rainbow colour scheme. I appreciate that this is not necessarily going to be for everyone, but it is really nice looking. It's got a wonderful, very unique design to it, where it's a corner of a building rather than being like just the front of a building, and that means that you get the open back there, but you also get all of the wonderful detail across two different sides of this building. What's significant about the community centre, and we've already seen one of these Lego sets retire, but it does link up with a few other sets from the Lego Friends theme. Last year's retired community kitchen could be inserted underneath the community centre, so the community centre rises up out of the community kitchen then becomes the new ground floor for the building, and everything kind of goes up a tier. It's also possible to do that, although it's not publicised in the same way by the Lego group, but it is also possible to do that with the retiring Heart Lake City Cafe if you take enough of the top of the roof of that building off. So you can have that slotted in as well as the community kitchen and potentially make this thing even taller. I find this fascinating as a design choice because it's kind of modular in its own right, but instead of being modular like the modular building collection, which goes horizontally, this is vertically horizontal, and that's such a fascinating thing for the Lego group to explore. I would love to see more of this. I appreciate that this one is retiring now, but could the LEGO Group potentially give us something more modular building style where you can just add additional floors in and build your own LEGO skyscraper with that wonderful level of detail, but just putting in whichever floors you feel like you want to add to it? That would be such a cool design choice. Either way, the loss of the Heart Lake City Community Centre, which does, as I say, follow on from the loss of the Community Kitchen last year, does mean that we are losing a really interesting style of building that we might not necessarily see again, certainly hadn't seen previous to this one. And so that is a shame. Again, I'm aware this is not necessarily for everybody. Some people don't like their LEGO buildings to be quite this colourful. Some people are not quite sold on this kind of corner design. And of course, some people are never going to be completely satisfied with mini dolls. But I do just feel like this is one of the cooler buildings that we've had in LEGO form recently, and it is a shame to lose it, and it is one that I think is worth bearing in mind if it happens to go on discount, if it happens to be kind of one of the things that your local store tends to be running out of, if it's worth just trying it out, just picking something up that's a little bit different and seeing something that you might not necessarily see in LEGO form again. Anyway, that is a full, big, long list of a bunch of buildings that are retiring that if you are a LEGO city builder, you might just want to be aware of. And I do think, as I said previously, and as I wanted to come back to, it is very interesting that a lot of the LEGO sets that we have talked about in this video have been LEGO sets that we have talked about in previous videos as well. And that suggests to me that 2025 is going to be a significant year for the LEGO Group in terms of retirements, because a lot of these buildings are significant sets in their own right. They are things that the LEGO Group has been experimenting with, that have come into other discussions around, say, the Twilight House, or around other castles, or around the modular building collection, or around Marvel and the superhero stuff. A lot of these buildings are really significant tentpoles within the LEGO catalogue. And as mentioned up top, the LEGO Group is not like Casio. They don't just put out the same product for decades and decades on end, and the fact that these sets are retiring is because the LEGO Group is making space for new things. And whatever it is that they're cooking up, whatever is just over the horizon at this point, is probably going to be really, really interesting, because it can build on all of these retiring sets and all of the ideas that they have introduced and all of the ways in which they have been significant, noteworthy LEGO sets. And then we can get something which is similar to that but completely different in many other ways. I don't know everything that is coming from the LEGO Group in 2025 and in 2026 and beyond, but I do know that there's so much cool stuff that's coming out month on month at the moment. It feels like the LEGO Group has really upped their game in terms of not only just the number of LEGO sets they're producing, but the varied quality of these things, all of the different niches that they are filling here, that I feel like whatever we get next from the LEGO Group, it's probably going to be really cool. And for that reason, I feel like LEGO city builders right now, in seeing all of these LEGO sets retire and just being aware of what things are going to disappear from store shelves, there's going to be an awful lot of space there for new buildings to fill those shelves. And that means that if you are a city builder, you have a lot to look forward to in the near future. But then what are your thoughts on all of these buildings? Which of these retiring sets are you the most disappointed to see go? Which ones are you going to be picking up before they are gone? Which LEGO sets are you hoping to see in the future? What kinds of designs and buildings would you like to have more of? Let us know in the comments down below. Do bear in mind that apparently the LEGO Group does like to keep an eye on social media and on the discussion online, so there is any chance that if you say something in this video that you want to see from the LEGO Group in the near future, they might just take you up on that, but who knows? Anyway, do make sure that you do all of the rest of the YouTube things as well, and give this video a thumbs up and hit subscribe and the notification bell. If you're going to be buying any LEGO set in the near future from lego.com, any of the LEGO sets that we've talked about in this video, and indeed just any LEGO set in general, make sure that you use the affiliate link which is down in the description and the QR code which is currently on the screen, as they take you straight to the LEGO website. We get a little bit of the percentage of the sale when you make that purchase, but it doesn't cost you a penny extra. It just helps to keep the lights on at Brick Fanatics. Do make sure that you go to brickfanatics.com for coverage of all things LEGO, by the way, including a regularly updated retiring sets list so that you know exactly what is retiring in any given month, and make sure that you sign up to our newsletter so that you never miss anything LEGO related ever again. Thank you very much for watching and have a wonderful day.